All right, let's jump into the world of ethnographic fieldwork. We're doing a deep dive today into how anthropologists actually do their research.
Yeah, it's more than just Indiana Jones, huh?
Right. I mean, I knew it was more complicated than that, but wow, looking at this material, you weren't kidding around.
You weren't afraid to dig into some dense stuff, which honestly is great.
I will admit, some of these books looked a little intimidating, but that's why you're here.
Yeah.
To help me unpack this all, because what I thought I knew about fieldwork versus what these sources say.
Yeah, what's got you hung up?
Well, I always pictured anthropologists like jet setting to these exotic locations, blending in, kind of romantic.
Right. The classic image.
Exactly. But these sources paint a picture of, well, honestly, a lot more awkward encounters and fumbles.
Uh-huh, yeah, that's way more realistic. The accidental clown, anthropologists call it.
The accidental clown.
Yeah, it's kind of a trope in anthropology for a reason.
Makes sense.
We tend to think of culture as this big, abstract thing,
Right.
but it's really in those everyday interactions where it comes to life.
It's like that saying, you don't know what you don't know.
Exactly. And for anthropologists, those moments of realizing they don't know, those are often the most illuminating. One source I was looking at recounted an anthropologist studying a small fishing community. He did his research, learned some basic phrases, thought he was prepared.
Sounds thorough.
Turns out he'd completely misunderstood how their gift-giving customs worked.
Oh, no.
Yeah, he ended up deeply offending his hosts, which actually I think is something most anthropologists experience at some point or another. Culture shock cuts both ways.
Wow, so even those fieldwork fails can be insightful.
Absolutely. This particular community had to explain not just the what of their customs, but the why,
I see.
the deeper meanings behind them.
So it forced him to confront his own assumptions.
Exactly, and it led to a much richer understanding of their social dynamics.
Wow, that's really interesting. It makes it sound incredibly difficult, though. You're not just observing, you're trying to navigate these complex cultural webs.
Yeah, and on top of that, the role of the anthropologist can shift too. One minute you're the accidental clown, the next you might find yourself placed on a pedestal.
You mean treated like an expert?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because you're an outsider.
How strange. It's a lot to navigate.
It really is. It's a delicate balance.
So not only do you need the awareness to avoid major cultural faux pas, but you also need to manage people seeing you as some all-knowing guru.
It's a weird position to be in.
I bet. How do you even begin to navigate that?
It's tricky. It requires constant self-reflection for sure.
I can
A
imagine.
willingness to acknowledge your own biases and limitations. One of your sources described it as walking a tightrope
Between what?
between participation and observation.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
You need to be immersed enough to understand what's going on.
Exactly. But also maintain enough distance to be able to analyze what you're seeing.
To be objective.
To a degree, yeah. It's kind of
Like what?
it's like trying to read a map while you're hiking through unfamiliar terrain.
Okay, yeah, I can see that.
You need to know where you are in relation to the bigger picture,
Right.
but you also need to pay attention to each step you take.
That's a great analogy. And speaking of different landscapes,
Oh.
our sources talk about all these different settings where fieldwork takes place.
Of course. It's not all about remote villages in the Amazon,
It's not.
Okay, well, some of it is, but anthropologists are also studying urban environments.
Like what?
Anything, really. The social impact of technology, for example.
So how do you adapt to such different environments like that?
That adaptability is key in fieldwork.
Makes sense.
One thing that remains constant is participant observation.
Which is?
Immersing oneself in the daily rhythms of the community, building relationships, observing how people interact.
Okay.
But the specific techniques used can vary widely.
Give me an example. How would it be different in, say, Silicon Valley versus a remote village in the Amazon?
Okay, well, in the Amazon, an anthropologist might spend months living in a village, participating in daily activities, learning the local language, collecting oral histories.
So you really become a part of the community.
Exactly. In Silicon Valley, you might embed yourself in a tech startup. You'd be attending meetings, observing work practices, things like that.
So different approaches, but the same goal.
Right. And it's not always about formal interviews or surveys.
Really?
Sometimes the most valuable insights emerge from informal conversations, chance encounters.
Just observing.
Exactly. It's as much an art as it is a science.
Because you're trying to make sense of human behavior beliefs.
Yes. All those messy, complicated things that make us who we are.
And that's where the real challenge is.
It's also the real reward. It's about going beyond the surface, questioning your assumptions.
And ultimately piecing together a deeper understanding of the human experience.
Oh,
It's interesting, though, because we often use these neat categories to understand the world,
Like what?
like traditional versus modern. But it's not that simple, is it?
Not at all. They're useful starting points. But field work often reveals how complex and interconnected things really are.
Yeah, those categories never tell the whole story, do they?
Not even close. Take the concept of tradition, for example.
Are-
We tend to think of it as something static, passed down unchanged.
Right, like it's stuck in the past.
Exactly. But what's fascinating is that fieldwork often reveals how tradition is actually a dynamic process.
Dynamic? How so?
It's constantly being adapted and reinterpreted.
To fit new circumstances.
Exactly. One of your sources, an anthropologist studying a rural community in Southeast Asia, found that what appeared to be ancient rituals were actually relatively recent adaptations.
Oh, wow. So not actually ancient at all.
Well, they represented something ancient, but they were responses to things like colonialism and rapid social change.
So tradition isn't about clinging to the past. It's about making it meaningful in the present.
That's a great way to put it. And speaking of change,
Okay.
it makes you think about the ethnographic present, right?
How do you capture a culture that's always in motion? It's like trying to take a picture of a river.
The water's already gone.
Exactly. Seems impossible.
It's definitely a challenge, and there's no single answer, but that's where the anthropologist's skill as a storyteller comes in.
Okay.
Because it's not just about presenting a dry, objective account of what you observed.
You need to bring it to life.
Yes. It's about weaving together observations, experiences, insights to create a compelling narrative that captures the essence of a culture.
While still acknowledging that it's always changing.
Exactly.
And you try to find those common threads.
The underlying patterns, beliefs, the things that give a culture its identity, even as it evolves.
That makes sense. It's like you need to understand the past and the present at the same time.
And we can't forget about the future.
Oh, you're talking about virtual fieldwork?
Of course. The internet, social media,
It's a whole new world for anthropologists.
with a whole new set of challenges.
Like, how do you even do fieldwork in those spaces? It's so different.
It is. And anthropologists are still figuring it out, which is part of the excitement. But those core skills, observation, empathy, cultural sensitivity, those are still essential.
It all comes back to that.
It does. Whether you're sipping tea in a remote village or, scrolling through online forums.
It's about understanding people.
And ultimately ourselves, right? By studying other cultures, we gain this new perspective.
On our own assumptions, our own way of seeing the world.
Exactly. Anthropology is about appreciating the diversity of human experience.
And realizing just how much we all have in common.
Perfectly said.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive. It's given me so much to think about.
Me too.
And to our listener, I hope this inspires you to keep exploring the world of anthropology.
There are so many amazing cultures out there to learn about.
And who knows, maybe one day you'll even do some field work of your own.